Engagement Planner,
Hello, everyone.
and Samantha Terry, our NPU Program Manager and NPU University Registrar.
Hey, everybody.
We're streaming this class on Facebook, so to those of you that are watching on Facebook, good evening. And you can certainly ask any questions you have or make any comments there. And if we have time to take them at the end, we will certainly do so. It's very good to see some familiar faces. Mr. Martin, good to see you again. Jennifer Brooks, you're competing with Mr. Martin for the number of NPU University classes attended. Jennifer won the Atlanta City Design Book last night for having attended the greatest number of NPU University classes. And I have to pause at the moment to acknowledge that I just glanced, my eyes fell on an NPU University visionary. I'm very glad that we have with us tonight Lauren Kirk, who is our former NPU planner, and she was on my team last year until she left us for greener pastures. But Lauren worked very hard to bring NPU University to fruition. We're really, really glad to have you here tonight, Lauren, and it's so good to see you. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to my colleague, Theo Pace, who is the Atlanta City Council's staff director. He's joined by some of his team members, and I'll let him introduce them, but we're very glad to have Mr. Pace with us tonight, who will be teaching the legislative process, WB 1006. Without further ado, Mr. Pace.
Thank you, Leah. I appreciate you for having me this evening. I hope everyone is doing well. Just much as we've been having going on the last couple of weeks, COVID-19 and just the various protests across the city, I hope everyone is safe. As Leah stated, my name is Theo Pace. I'm the Atlanta City Council staff director. I've served in that role for the past 2 years. Previous to that, I served as deputy council staff director, as well as legislative and policy analyst with the city council going back to 2013. I've been with the city for about 13 years. I've worked previously in the law department, as well as the Department of Parks and Recreation, where in each department I was responsible for the legislative process, as well as contracts and things like that within the procurement realm. I also have a neighborhood background as well. I served for 3 years as chair of NPUI. I don't see Ms. Glover, Eunice Glover on the Zoom, but I just want to say hello to her. Been involved in my NPU going back a few years when then District 10 council member C.T. Martin said you need to come to an NPU meeting with me. So that's how I pretty much got involved in the NPU process. I'm also involved in my neighborhood association, the Chalet Peyton Community Association, where I serve as vice president. And wearing those dual hats, I really understand the role of working for the city and as well as being a neighborhood person and really trying to connect, citizen participation. I always try to look at things through the lens of a community member, someone that's involved in things like that. So as I get through my presentation, I will talk about the various standing committees of the city council. I'll talk about the various types of legislation. In addition to that, I'll give a brief overview of the legislative schedule. As I get through that, if you all could hold your questions to the end. And I also would like to recognize my staff that's here on the call. As council staff director, I oversee the Office of Research and Policy Analysis, the Office of Communication, as well as the Office of Administrative Services. So this evening, I have a number of my staff from the Office of Research and Policy Analysis. And as I go through the agenda, I'll mention their names. So I appreciate you all joining as well. Samantha, if we can move to the first slide. So I can't see, so if you want to let me know that you move to the next slide. Okay. There you go. So the Atlanta City Council has 15 council members as well as the council president. Some of you know we have 12 council districts, so we have 12 district council members as well as 3 at-large members. Your at-large members basically serve 4 different council districts. So Post 1 at-large council member Michael Bond pretty much serves in council districts 1, 2, 3, and 4. The council president, she votes, she's non-voting, she doesn't vote on legislation unless there's a tie. She presides over the council meetings every first and third Monday of each month, and she makes the annual committee assignments for the various 7 standing committees that we have with the council. So if you move to the next slide, Samantha. So as I mentioned, we have 7 standing committees: city utilities, community development and human services, public safety and legal administration, zoning, transportation, finance executive, and committee on council. So if you move to the next slide. So basically the Atlanta City Code of Ordinances provides jurisdiction of each standing committees. And you can go ahead and move to the next slide, Samantha. So the first slide that we have is our City Utilities Committee. So basically that committee has purview over the Department of Watershed Management, the Department of Public Works, as it relates to solid waste, sanitation and recycling, street lining and banners, street naming and street abandonments. Actually, we have a piece of legislation that will be before the City Council on Monday that will shift those responsibilities of street naming, street abandonments, and street dispositions to the Transportation Committee, excuse me. This committee also oversees encroachment and easement agreements. They're responsible for cable television, our city channel 26, various franchise agreements that the city has with Comcast and Atlanta Gas as well. If you move to the next slide. Our Community Development and Human Services Committee actually has purview of an array of various departments and boards and commissions as well. They have purview over the Department of City Planning, the newly created Department of Grants and Community Development, Atlanta Workforce Development Agency, the Atlanta Housing Authority, the Department of Parks and Recreation as well. As it relates to NPUs, the CDHS committee has purview over the comprehensive development plans and land use plans. So annually, you all will go and update, as Mr. Martin knows, your CDPs and land use plans. CDHS has purview over this committee, over these responsibilities. They also have purview over the Office of Buildings, including building code enforcement, your building permits, the Office of Film and Entertainment. If you move to the next slide, Samantha, just continuing on with CDHS, they have a number of boards and commissions that they oversee. You'll see the Atlanta Beltline reports, and it provides quarterly updates to the CDHS committee, as well as you see the various number of boards and commissions. The NPUs under the Department of City Planning has purview to CDHS, the various Fulton Atlantic Community Action Authority, the Fulton and DeKalb County Boards of Health, and the Atlanta Fulton County Library Board of Trustees also reports to CDHS. And each of these departments and boards and commissions actually provides a presentation or a quarterly, semi-annually, or annual update based on the authorizing legislation of their creation, how often they report to each committee. So if you move to the next slide, Public Safety and Legal Administration is responsible for basically the public safety generally. They have purview over the Department of Police, Fire and Rescue, Corrections, as well as our courts. The municipal court operations and the city solicitor's office, and as well as the municipal court judges as well. So each of these departments, including the Department of Law, provide quarterly updates to the Public Safety and Legal Administration Committee. We move to the next slide, the zoning committee. I believe that Ms. Kieta Holmes presented to you all and gave you all an in-depth overview of the zoning process. So this is where the zoning committee comes in. The zoning review board, as well as the board of zoning adjustments, are under the purview of under the zoning committee. And I believe she stated the process of how zoning applications are routed to the NPUs, to the ZRB. After they come to the ZRB, that board, as well as the NPU, provides recommendations to the zoning committee. The zoning committee makes a recommendation to the full council. And so that's how zoning applications are handled. BZA applications do not come under the purview of the zoning committee, but the appointments to the board actually. So any individual being appointed to either of these committees would come before the zoning committee for their appointment. They also have purview over the Metropolitan Atlanta River Protection Act as well. If we want to move to the next slide. So the Transportation Committee has purview over the Department of Aviation at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. The Department of Public Works as it relates to transportation, but a lot of those responsibilities come under the purview now of the Atlanta Department of Transportation. MARTA provides quarterly reports to the Transportation Committee as well as the Atlanta Regional Commission. Council President Felicia Moore is the city's appointment to the ARC. And so she comes on a quarterly basis and provides an update. The Renew Atlanta Bond Infrastructure Program also comes under the purview of the Transportation Committee, as well as pedestrian and bike facilities, trails, sidewalks, and things of that nature. Moving to the next slide, the Finance Executive Committee, as you can imagine, has purview over all budgetary related items of the city, but as well as the Department of Finance, the Department of Human Resources, Atlanta Information Management, which is our IT department, as well as the Department of Procurement and the Office of Contract Compliance also report to finance. We're right in the middle of our budget. We're nearing our budget adoption. So as you can imagine, the Finance Executive Committee has been really busy the last couple months as we've moved into a teleworking posture. We've had a lot of remote meetings, and we had our budget public hearing. Our interactive hearing was last week. We received well over 4,000 comments from the public as it relates to what the public would like to see in the city's budget as far as their priorities. So moving to the next slide, just a continuation, the Department of Customer Service and 311, as well as the newly created Department of Enterprise Assets Management, which is basically our facilities management department, and various offices of the mayor also report to the Finance Executive Committee. We also have the Audit Commission and the various pension boards, and also the Atlanta City Employees Credit Union and various other boards and commissions, such as the Atlanta Sister Cities Commission, all report to the Finance Committee. Next slide, which is our Committee on Council. So this committee basically oversees all operations of the City Council. Myself, as well as the municipal clerk, Forrest Webb III, were nominated and approved through the Finance Committee. The Office of Ethics also reports to this committee, as well as they conduct an annual review of boards and commissions and make any recommendations related to their standing committees of purview. Also, any commissioners or any individuals appointed to boards and commissions, initially you report to your committee of purview, which are the other 6 committees. But you know that if you've been appointed to a board and commission, once your appointment leaves that committee, it comes before the Committee on Council for final recommendation to the full body, which meets the first and third Monday of each month. So the committee assignments, and I'll go through these very briefly. For 2020, Councilmember Nellen Archibald, who represents District 5, is the chair of the City Utilities Committee. As you can see, it has at the meeting. I'm sorry, if you can go back. The meeting as scheduled is every Tuesday at 10 a.m., which hasn't changed as we've moved into a COVID-19 and teleworking posture. Our policy analyst for that committee is Jared Evans, and our legislative assistant is David Johnson. And we'll get to another slide later where you can see how you can reach out. If you ever have any questions, you can always, of course, reach out to your council member, but the policy analyst has a lot of in-depth knowledge, as well as the legislative assistant, of what's going on in the process with the committees. If you have a question about a specific piece of legislation, you can always reach out to the policy analyst. The next slide is our Community Development and Human Services Committee, which meets historically on Tuesdays at noon. As we've been teleworking, that time has now changed to Tuesdays at 1:30. As we telework and we host our meetings, we stream our meetings on Facebook and Twitter, we have to have a little bit more lead time as far as getting our committees up and running. So what we've done is try to spread our committees out. If you want to go to the next slide. Our Public Safety and Legal Administration Committee is chaired by Councilwoman Joyce Shepard. Now that committee initially met on Tuesdays at 3 o'clock. Post-COVID-19, that committee meets now at Monday at 2 o'clock. So it will be the same time as the briefing. Corinne Lindo is our legislative assistant, our policy analyst, I'm sorry. And Jasmine Tell is our legislative assistant for public safety. And going back to CDHS, Julia Puladindi serves as a policy analyst for that committee, and Wasona Griffin serves as a legislative assistant. So if we can move ahead to the zoning committee, which is chaired by Carla Smith in District 1. The zoning committee currently meets in committee of the whole on the first and third Mondays of each month. As the zoning review board has been unable to meet since the closure of City Hall, their meetings are held in committee of the whole on the first and third Monday of each month. Corinne is our policy analyst for that committee, and Wasona Griffin serves as a legislative assistant. Transportation Committee, Councilman Andre Dickens, who serves as Post 3 at large, is the chair of that committee for the second consecutive year, I believe. That committee currently meets now Wednesdays at 9:30 in the morning. Julia is a policy analyst for that committee, and Jasmine Tell serves as our legislative assistant. Moving to the next committee, our finance chair is Jennifer N. serves in Council District 6, and that committee meets currently Wednesdays at 1:30 in the afternoon. Our policy analyst is also our deputy council staff director, Santana Kempson Wright, and our legislative assistant is David Johnson. Committee on Council is chaired by Councilmember JP Mazakite, who serves in Council District 8. And this committee also meets in committee of the whole during our council meetings. Jared Evans is our policy analyst, and Ms. Tell is also our legislative assistant. And just a rule of thumb, our council meetings are held the second and fourth weeks of each month. And our full council meetings are the first and third Mondays of each month. So getting into how legislation works. And if you want to move to the next slide, Ms. Terry. So there are a number of types of legislation that can be introduced. You have ordinances, which require 2 reads and have the force and effect of law. And they must be read before the full council at 2 regular meetings. The exception to that is a charter amendment, which requires 3 readings. And readings basically means that the legislation has to be sounded twice at the full council meeting. You have resolutions that require only 1 read and can be adopted at the same meeting. So what you may get into is that you may also run into instances where resolutions are read and adopted at the same meeting. And I'll get into the various personal papers and papers for immediate consideration momentarily. You also have communications, and communications are basically the appointment of a commissioner to the department or the appointment of an individual to a board and commission. Communications can also be sounded as reports or findings by the audit committee or various individuals or organizations. You also have claims, and claims are basically applications filled out by individuals for property damage or bodily injury based on infrastructure issues or different things like that. So an application would go to the council president as well as the mayor's office. The Department of Law Claims Division would investigate the claim and provide a recommendation, which goes through our Public Safety and Legal Administration Committee. So moving to the next slide is our legislative time schedule. And there's a lot of dates here, but what I would focus on are your two columns to the right. And these are all of our city council committee meetings, as well as our committee on council and council meetings. All of the other dates are appropriate for various departments. The importance of this legislation is that, as you can see, it provides different deadlines for legislation as it's created to move along to the procurement department, the law department, the chief of staff, and then it comes to the city council. So we're always, the legislative cycle is always continuous, except for those highlighted areas that you see in yellow, which are our spring, summer, and winter recesses, which are historically 2 weeks each year. The funny thing about this is that you have a number of people, a number of employees throughout the city that schedule their vacations, doctor's appointments, various things based on this legislative time schedule. So it's almost legislative wise, it's the Bible. And we release the schedule towards the end of the year for the upcoming year. And each department basically reviews this, and this is how they get the legislation to various departments. So currently we are in schedule cycle 11, and I'll just use that as an example. So this basically started, this process started back in April, on April 27th. A department will submit a request to the law department to review or draft legislation. It moves over after the law department reviews it. If it's procurement or finance related, it would then go to that department of purview for their review and approval, which would be May 11th in this instance. From there, the procurement departments provides the legislation back to the department of purview, who would then put the legislative packet together and then submit it to the chief of staff for their review. Upon that, the chief of staff will submit it to my office, the Office of Research and Policy, and that's what we use to build the various legislative committee agendas that you see. So upcoming, we have the June 9th and 10th meetings. It was actually just completed actually yesterday, and then goes to full council on Monday, June 15th. So that's just a brief example. We have 21 legislative cycles in the city, and then we start all over next year. So the legislative process is ongoing. You have various pieces of legislation at different points throughout the legislative process. And each department has basically what's called a department liaison that's responsible for drafting and routing the legislation to each of these various departments: law, finance, procurement, and getting it to the chief of staff in a timely manner. Moving to the next slide, our council website. So I would encourage everyone to take a moment and go to citycouncil.atlantagA.gov and just save that as one of your favorite websites. If you're ever looking for anything as it relates to city council agendas, minutes, presentations, as you can see, we have them categorized by committee. You can also find information for your council member, their contact information and email address, as well as the various council divisions of the city council. Currently, we have, if you see under the Finance Executive Committee, anything that you need as it relates to the FY 2021 proposed budget can be found on that link. So I would really encourage everyone to take some time and really just go through the council website. It can answer a lot of the various questions that you have as it relates to agendas and the city council. If we go to the next slide. So this is a committee agenda. This is our City Utilities Committee agenda from this past Tuesday. If you look at the top header, you'll see the chair. You'll see our policy analyst, Jared Evans, with his phone number and email address if you need to reach out to him. It also has a number that you would use to be able to call in and listen to the meetings. As I mentioned earlier, we stream all of our meetings on Facebook and Twitter Live as well. But just going through the agenda, if you look, we start with the call to order of the meeting and the introduction of members that sit on the committee. Each committee has 7 council members that sit on that committee. They adopt the agenda and approve the minutes as well. And then we move to the public comment portion. Currently, as we're in the teleworking space, each committee agenda has the number that you can call and leave a public comment, not to exceed 3 minutes, and it closes 1 hour prior to the start of the meeting. So in this instance, public comment closed at 9 a.m. on Tuesday. We also include the various presentations, updates, and reports on every agenda, which are normally at the top of each meeting. And then we also have our ordinances for first reading. So as I mentioned earlier, ordinances require 2 readings. So these are ordinances that are making the agenda for the first time. They're basically sounded and accepted, and there's no deliberation on them. We move to the regular portion of the agenda, which are ordinances for second reading. And these items have already gone, they were on the agenda for first reading. They've gone to the full council agenda as first read items, and then they were referred back to their committee of purview for second reading. So these items will actually be deliberated on, and the committee will make a recommendation to either approve, hold, adverse, or file, which are the 4 major votes that a committee will make. There are various others, but those are the major 4. A recommendation to approve, meaning they're okay with this legislation moving forward. A motion to hold, which means they want to hold it in committee for another cycle for either further deliberation or for additional information from the Department of Purview. Adverse means that they're not okay with this legislation moving forward and they want to oppose it. And to file basically means that this legislation was sounded, it was heard, deliberated on, and it just goes into the city record as it was being introduced. But it takes no effect, it has no effective law at all. So if you want to move to the next slide. So then we have a separate section, I'm sorry if you can go back, for resolutions. So resolutions, as you can see, require one read. So these items came on the agenda, they can be approved, recommendation can be made on them, they move directly to the full council. We want to move to the next slide. Papers held in committee. So these items have been held. They were introduced, they were deliberated on, and the body made a recommendation to hold them. So if you look at item number 18, that item was held on December 10th at the request of the sponsor. So in this instance, Councilmember Michael Julian Bond requested this information be held for additional information. And normally what the staff does is a good job of notating why this item was held. And it gives you an indication of what the deliberation was. If you go to the council website and you go to the agenda page and you click on the date for a particular meeting, you can go on and you can actually look at the legislation and read it. These are only the captions of the legislation, basically a brief description of what the legislation does. But if you go to the council website, which I really encourage you all to do, you can really actually sit and read through the resolution, the ordinance itself, as well as the supporting documentation. So if you go to the next slide, success is in the details. So how a piece of legislation is introduced and how it's passed and implemented are various different things. Through the committee process, a piece of legislation can be amended, which is a small minor correction to it or a minor revision. It can be substituted, where you have entire pieces of the body of the legislation removed and added with a more substantial piece. And so good legislation contains a purpose. It basically explains what it does and what it does not do. It provides the adequate City of Atlanta Code of Ordinances section, the dollar amount if it deals with the contract, as well as the appropriate account number, contract information, or memorandum of understanding legislation to the legislation. And it's always good as you're reviewing legislation to actually go back and look through the supporting documentation. Draft of MOUs of contracts and things like that are all required to be attached. So just reading the ordinance or resolution is one thing, but I really encourage you all to really go through it and look through the various supporting documentations that you have. So the legislative flow, there are a number of ways that legislation can be submitted, but this is from a departmental point of view. So as I mentioned earlier, the departments send legislation through the various supportive departments, and then it's submitted to the mayor's office. After the mayor reviews the legislation, the papers are submitted to the Office of Research and Policy Analysis, who provide an analysis for the council members. They prepare the agendas as well as publicize them on the council website of all 7 standing committees. In FY20 currently, the Office of Research and Policy Analysis has analyzed more than 1,100 pieces of legislation. Legislation can also be introduced by council members at the end of a council meeting. So if you ever look at your full council agenda at the very end, there's a section for papers for immediate consideration, which allows a paper to be read and adopted in the same meeting. And these are only resolutions because, again, resolutions don't really require one read. Or they can introduce a personal paper, which is has their name on it. So an ordinance by Councilmember Michael Julian Bond, and then it's referred to the appropriate standing committee. You may notice if you've been watching our council meetings that you may see a paper be referred to 2 committees. And that's because some of our committees have overlapping responsibilities. And so from time to time, you'll see a paper referred to 2 committees. So we go to the committee first, and normally the second committee is the Finance Executive Committee. Zoning items and claims come from the appropriate departments, come from Department of City Planning and the Law Department, and they come directly to our office to be put on the agenda. After legislation is adopted, the municipal clerk's office submits the legislation to the mayor's office, who has 8 days to sign it. She can either veto it. If she does nothing, in 8 days, it automatically becomes law, or she can sign it. Within 2 weeks after the municipal clerk's office receives the legislation back, it's added to the council website. If you go under the section listed as legislation, there's a tab that has final action legislation, as you see here, and you can search for legislation by legislative ID number, the legislation date, and legislative keyword. And this historically has legislation dating back to the early 2000s. Legislation prior to that can be found at the Atlanta History Center. So each year, I believe currently the municipal clerk's office has legislation dating back to 2003. I think a little bit further than that. Let me go back, I believe about 1996. But any legislation, if you want to get a copy of that and it's not found here on the final action legislation, you can reach out to the Atlanta History Center and they can be able to provide that to you. It's actually a fun field trip to take if you actually want to go back and look at legislation dating back to the early 1900s and things like that are all found at the Keenan Research Center on the Atlanta History Center campus. So I would encourage everyone to follow our social media platforms, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. You can find the Atlanta City Council at ATL Council. We've also instituted, I don't know if you all may be familiar with the Medium, as well as YouTube. If you go to Atlanta City Council, we post a wealth of information on those platforms, a lot of updates. You can watch as we're teleworking and working remotely, all of our council meetings and committee meetings as well. We have a weekly update with the mayor as it relates to COVID-19, which can be also viewed at ATL Council on Twitter Live and Facebook as well. And with that, I'll pretty much leave time for if anyone has any questions or anything like that. I hope this information was helpful to you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Pace. That was incredibly helpful. And we appreciate you being here and sharing that wealth of knowledge. At this time, if there are questions, I would reiterate and remind everyone to please use the raise hand feature at the bottom of your screen. If you click where it says participants, you should see where it says raise hand, or you may see the blue hand icon. You can click on that to raise your hand. And please, as always, which is NPU University policy, please limit your questions or comments only to course content related questions. I see that Mr. Martin has raised his hand. Go ahead, Mr. Martin.
Yes, let's see. I had, I guess it's 4 questions.
How did I know you would have more than 3 questions?
3 of them are short questions.
Okay.
Go right ahead.
So with the 3 short questions, first, with regard to the papers that are held in committee, can these then be sort of kicked out of committee or forwarded out of committee at any meeting, because they've already been read countless times, having been held in committee?
So what can happen actually is a held item, if it's a personal paper and it's been held longer than 2 cycles, so longer than 2 committee meetings, a council member can remove that item from held. So we can get to our full council meeting on Monday. And for instance, the city utilities agenda item that Mr. Bond introduced, because it had been held since December, he can pull that item up on the floor during the council meeting and say, I want to put this up for a vote. If out of committee paper, if it's an administration paper, the council would have to go into committee of the whole to actually deliberate on this paper. But if it's a personal paper and I'm the author, using it as an example, as long as it's been held twice, I can pull that item right up on the floor of council and basically put it for, make a motion to approve.
Without a committee recommendation.
That's correct.
Okay.
We have revised our process about a year or so ago as it relates to held items. Historically, held items will be held for the entire quadrennial legislative cycle, so they will be held up to 4 years. And as the end of that, as we come to an end of an election, we have a new council coming in, items that were held would all fall off. That made our agendas extremely large and cumbersome, and we were really running into issues, technical issues. We would have some of our committee agenda packets could be 1,000 pages with, 50 to 60 held items. So what we did was the council modify that portion of the code section to now items that are held would fall off within a year. So using Councilmember Bond's piece of legislation as an example, it was held on December 10th. Come December 10th, 2020, it would be filed automatically. And that's because it's been held for 12 months. So now we've kind of gotten into where they're annually, we're in a repeated cycle of filing legislation that's been held for up to a year. But historically, you would see pieces of legislation introduced in January of 2018 that would still remain on our committee agendas.
Okay. Turned out to be a longer question than I was expecting.
Yeah.
Maybe I should give someone else a chance
Yeah.
before I ask any others.
Well, we can come back to you. I do have one other hand raised. I'll come right back to you, Mr. Martin. Nancy Wiley. Ms. Wiley, you can unmute yourself and ask your question.
Sorry, forgot I needed to unmute. Thank you. What are the political ramifications of pulling something out of the committee without having had the committee endorsement? I'm more familiar with the state legislature where they can't do that, but if you vote against the committee chair's recommendations, you're not going to get a lot of things through. So I was wondering, I was flabbergasted that the council person could pull it out, but what are the political ramifications?
Well, I'll start it off with just referencing that we're staff and we provide legislative support to the council. But you have to realize if you go back to there are 7 committee members that make up a committee. To have a piece of legislation be adopted by the full council, you need a majority, which is 8. So you would have 7 upset council members that say, hey, we held this in committee for a reason, and you're trying to adopt it. You're basically trying to circumvent the process and adopt it. So it happens from time to time, but it's not something that is frequent. The legislation normally, a lot of the work of the council is done in committee. A lot of our committees, exceed 2, 3, 4 hours, for instance. So a lot of the work is done in committee. So, it does happen from time to time, and it normally happens at the very end of a legislative cycle or at the end of a quadrennial term. We've had elections, you've had council members are going out, but you would have to take into the impact of the legislation, exactly what it does and different things like that. It's rare that it happens, but it is an option that's in our code of ordinances.
Got it. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. And next we have a question from Jennifer Brooks. Jennifer, you can unmute and ask your question.
Okay, I just wonder, when I look at the agenda for either a committee meeting or full council, there's usually the agenda and then there's all the materials. And so it looks like some of those meetings, they arrive and there's, 287 pages of stuff. And then they're going to be deciding on it. So I'm just wondering who's responsible for all that material and who's really vetting that material.
So on the executive side, you have the law department, the procurement department, and the finance department, they basically support the various other departments of the city, Department of Planning, City Planning, Department of Parks and Recreation. They vet the legislation before it's submitted to the city council. Once the city council gets it, the Office of Research and Policy Analysis analyzes the legislation. I served as a policy analyst for about 5 to 6 years. And you would be surprised the work that this team puts into vetting a piece of legislation. They ask a lot of questions. They look at best practices from other cities. And so if you look on the city council site and you look at an agenda, you will see the public agenda. And then aside from that, what you don't see, which is a member's agenda, which we provide to the council members, which provides staff comments or an analysis of every piece of legislation on that agenda. The Office of Research and Policy Analysis provides their own comments. And we ask questions, we probe, we go back and look at other contracts and best practices from other municipalities and cities, locally, nationally. And so our job is to really ask questions. And sometimes you'll see a lot of the questions that are asked by council members are actually from the staff. And so that's, a second layer of the vetting process on the council side once we get legislation from the executive branch. If you ever want to, minimize the number of pages that you print out on the agenda, I would say look for the first few pages, which just has the captions, and you can kind of look through there. But you can always go back and look at the supporting documentation and things like that. But the staff really puts a lot of time into, looking at one piece of legislation and then going back. We use final action legislation. If there's a contract that is up for a second renewal, the staff will go back and look at, the authorizing contract as well as the first renewal option, just to make sure everything, kind of pretty much matches up. But our job is to ask questions to the council member to say, hey, you may want to ask this question. And we really look at it from, our council members represent you all. So we look at it from, a constituent's point of view. I'm a constituent, I live in District 10. And so when I was looking at legislation, I would always look at it from the public's point of view. I would want to ask this question if I was reviewing this piece of legislation before it was adopted. And so I really encourage the staff to kind of do the same. And we have a number of means. We have good relationships with, various cities across the country that we can reach out and do things. The staff also drafts a lot of legislation. The personal papers that you see that are introduced by council members, the staff normally do. Santana and Corinne, Jared and Julia, they draft probably over 250 pieces of legislation just in the last year on behalf of the council members. So we put a lot of research, into what we're doing. So, on the executive side, those various departments, finance looks at the fiscal impact, the law department looks at it from a legal point of view. Procurement looks at that you're following, the city's procurement code, was it properly procured? But then once it comes over to council, we have an internal staff that really goes back and analyzes the legislation that we receive.
I guess thank you very much. That's very helpful. And I guess part of what I was wondering is about vetting, and I appreciate all the background work. But for example, I don't know if you remember the e-scooter legislation from last year, and there was the Department of Mobility had set out a survey. And then it seemed as though the survey results figured largely in how the council would vote on it. But it was a bogus survey, essentially, because there wasn't any control for people doing it more than once. So that's data that is contaminated, and yet it was presented as though that's legitimate. And so how does the council member know, other than the commissioners there saying this is what we're basing this on?
Well,
so I just wonder how can they decide if this data is questioned?
One thing that I would always encourage the public to do is get to know your elected officials, your district council members, as well as your at-large members. I think every member of the council knows Jim Martin very well. And so when Mr. Martin he takes the time to send a lengthy email to the council, and he sends it to all members of the zoning committee or all members of the community development, committee. They tend to listen to him, and they tend to probe and ask, and ask questions. So if you ever, if you want to make sure, that may not be in that specific instance something that the council knew about. But what I would also say is that, they listen to the public. And if there's enough emails from, a member of a district, best believe District 1 member, council member Carla Smith will say, I got 50 emails from my constituents about a particular piece of legislation. So I have some questions. And they may do it offline, behind the scenes, or they may do it on camera during the meeting. But what I would really encourage, the public to do is really get involved, research, look at the agendas yourself. And if you have a particular question, reach out to your council member. I can think of, I staffed zoning committee for a number of years. If there was a zoning item that a particular neighborhood association didn't like, and it was approved through a particular NPU, you'd have 100 emails in a district council member's inbox. And, you know, a lot of times that weighs more than the staff's analysis. What a department says is that, you know, boots on the ground really is important. And I would just strongly encourage everyone to know who your district council member is, know who your at-large member is, and know all the various members that sit on the committee. A lot of times you can stop a piece of legislation from moving forward just by emailing the committee, and they'll ask questions of the law department, of the department itself. And a lot of times that's better vetting than anyone else could do is just, you know, constituents kind of joining together and, you know, and sending emails, phone calls. You all need to look at this and review this piece of legislation a little bit more thoroughly.
Thank you for that question, Jennifer. And we have a few more hands raised as well. John Hayes, you're up next.
Hey, first of all, thank you, Theo. Great presentation. Appreciate y'all's time. Like Jim, I've got a lot of questions. I'll just do one. So when a random member of the public who knows nothing about how to actually write legislation, but might have a good idea, has a good idea, what's their path? Is it contact their council member? And if that's what it is, what can they provide their council members or whatever the path may be to smooth that process?
I would particularly try to set up a meeting with them. I would, you know, unless you send an email with the various findings that you have, try to set up a meeting with them. Initially, you may meet with some of their staff. Each of them pretty much has a chief of staff that, you know, you would initially sit and meet with. But you'd be surprised how many pieces of legislation that come up that are, you know, organic in nature that come from the community. I can think off the top of my head, we have a couple of pieces that are going to be introduced on Monday that, you know, that the public really pushed for. You could always reach out to, you know, the Department of Purview. But as a representative of someone, you know, who represents you, I would reach out to your district council member, your at-large council member. You know, it's easier than you think.
Thank you. And John, if you want, you can raise your hand again to go back into the queue to ask those additional questions. I know we're coming back to Jim Martin as well. Mandy Eidson, you're up next. Pardon me if I didn't pronounce your last name correctly. Mandy?
Hi, sorry. Yeah, so I'm kind of new to this, but was really interested in how do I tell my friends who are getting, you know, very interested in this Monday's meeting, particularly regarding the budget and the police budget. How do I describe to them in layman's terms, like what that's going to look like when the council is discussing the budget, listening to public comments? I know that I'm sure that there's just been a flood of public comments. So I'm just trying to give them a picture, having never, you know, experienced this or watched one for myself. But what can they expect? What does that look like? And how do I describe that?
So historically, I would say I've been with the council since 2013, and we may have gotten, you know, in a good year, 50, 75, you know, we actually have an interactive budget hearing that's a requirement of the state, which we had last Tuesday. I think it was last Tuesday. Yeah. We normally get 50, 75, you know, people show up. Normally here at City Hall in the chamber. In the evening, it starts at 6:15. Good year, 75. This year, we've gotten over 4,200 emails, phone calls, voicemails, text messages, Facebook posts. So people's emails are inundated with, you know, questions specifically as it relates to the Atlanta City Detention Center and the Atlanta Police Department's budget. And I think you may have seen in the news over the course of the last 24 hours that the mayor is reducing the Department of Corrections budget from $18 million to 3.5 and moving a lot of that money to community-based initiatives. She's moving the staff, the personnel staff in the jail under the Mayor's Office of Constituent Services to really provide more community-based initiatives. And I would say, you know, that is due to the large public input that has been had. I mean, 4,000 emails is, from a staff's point of view, is pretty astonishing, because historically you would have specific organizations coming out asking for more money. You would have Park Pride. You would have Wonder Root, which is an arts organization, coming saying, hey, we really need more money in the budget. But you really didn't get a lot of people, you know, that heavily involved. And I think this year is something, you know, that's different in that you've gotten all of these people, you know, saying, hey, we want to see you do this with the budget. And because of that, the mayor, you know, revised her budget to reduce the Department of Corrections. So I say that all to say public input and, you know, staying involved in your government is really more important than national politics. Your local government is so important. And I, you know, just as a neighborhood person, a former NPU chair, I really encourage everybody. You may not always have a public comment, you know, but each week, take a moment and go through and look through your committee agendas, look through the full council agenda, just see, you know, see what you have on there. And if there's something that, you know, you would like to make a comment about, what I've tried to do is have the staff, you know, make public input as easy as possible. That's why for our interactive budget hearing, we had so many different means for people to leave their public comments, text messages, emails, social media. You could call in and leave a 3-minute voicemail. So we really, you know, in this environment, try to make it as easy as possible for people to make their voice heard. And I think, you know, if I just kind of look at my staff, we have a bunch of people that are heavily involved in various community organizations and things like that. So although you may look at it from the outside looking in like it's City Hall, there are a lot of people in city government that are involved in their local neighborhood association and different things like that, and really work for the, you know, for the better good of all. So whenever I try to use my influence, I always try to look at it from someone who lives in the neighborhood and may not know what's going on at City Hall. So it's a little, you know, the best of both worlds, because when I leave, I go, you know, we had our neighborhood association meeting on Monday. And a lot of things we were talking about, the city budget came out, sidewalks, different, you know, so the normal things that affect everyone affect me too. I live in the city. So I try to look at it through the lens of a constituent out on the street a lot of times.
Yeah. And so does the budget, I mean, if there are proposed revisions to the budget, do those get voted on during the meeting, or does a new meeting get? So
the adoption of the budget itself, and I'll kind of give you all a little exclusive, is that we're actually not going to adopt the budget on Monday. We're going to adopt it on Friday of next week. And that's due in part to public input. You know, I think between our city council members and the executive branch, they wanted to take a couple of days and really have a larger discussion on the city jail as well as the Atlanta Police Department. So we're actually going to adopt the budget on Friday. The way that process works, and a budget adoption day, the last couple of years, it's been about 3 or 4 hours, but I've worked years when we started the meeting at 1 o'clock and we didn't end till midnight. You have a large number of budget amendments and different things like that. It's a slow process, but I think the last couple of years, the administration along with the city council have really tried to get ahead of it and make as many budget amendments as we can ahead of time to make the budget adoption day really as smooth as possible. So the way the process will go is it's just like a normal meeting. We'll have public comment at the beginning. I think for our finance executive meeting yesterday, we had about 53, 55 public comment, members of the public provide comments. So I can just imagine how Monday is gonna be. We'll probably have close to 100. And we'll play every comment. You know, every member of the public gets 3 minutes. So we'll go through that entire process. We'll go through our standing committees. And normally what we do on Budget Adoption Day is move the finance agenda to last of our standing committees. And then, you know, we bring forth the budget. We'll go through that. We'll bring forth paper. There's really no increase in the city's millage rate. So no one really ever looks at that paper unless the millage rate is going up. And then you'll get a lot of people, you know, inquiring about that. And then the third item that goes with is the city's personnel paper. Our city budget is, you know, it's a large personnel budget, personnel costs, I should say. And so we adopt those 3 papers pretty much simultaneously. You're correct, Ms. Brooks, is that committees have 3 minutes for public comment. Full council is 2 minutes. Good catch. I appreciate that. So on Monday, you'll have our full council meetings. You have 2 minutes for public comment, but we play every one. And so, you know, if you all have, I don't know the number off the top of my head, but again, if you check about tomorrow afternoon, tomorrow evening, this time on the city council website, we'll have the city council, the full council agenda posted with the phone number at the top of the page that you can go ahead and leave your, you can call in and leave your comments.
The phone number is 404-330-6001.
I think we have a different number for each committee. I believe that's it.
I think that's full council.
Okay. I'll take your word for it, Leah, but I want everyone just kind of check back.
And yes, it's always a good idea to check the website. I tell people the same for the MPU meetings. I just want to, before we move on to the next question, I want to piggyback on what Mr. Pace said. And those of you who have attended a few of our courses have probably heard me say this several times, and you may even tire of hearing me say it, but I never get tired of pointing out the importance of having Atlantans at these decision-making tables, at these policy-making tables, at these discussion tables, even in conference rooms at City Hall. Atlanta City Hall has so many residents who work there. And I'm really proud of that. I live in the city of Atlanta. I'm a member of my neighborhood association and my MPU, and my entire team lives in the city of Atlanta. We're all active members of our neighborhood associations, and we're all active members of our MPUs as well. And it's important. It's important because our perspective as residents shapes the conversations that we have at City Hall. So we're not just doing our jobs, we're also fighting and advocating on behalf of our own neighborhoods, our own blocks. When street lights are out and we get calls about that, we're not just some random people from Lawrenceville who don't really care. Not crapping on Lawrenceville, I'm just, you know, it's just an example. But we actually live here and we get it, and it matters to us when there are public safety issues or watershed issues or code enforcement issues or planning issues, whatever those issues may be. It really does help. And I'm just proud to talk about that because it matters that there are so many of us that work at City Hall that also live in the city of Atlanta. So I'll jump off my soapbox.
And what I'll just add is, before we move on, is that, you know, Atlanta is one of the few major cities that really has an organized civic engagement structure. Which
yes, we are.
You know, and we're lucky enough that I think everyone's district and at-large members from time to time, maybe not every month, but every other month or quarterly, they attend their MPU meetings. I know that they've been on Zoom lately, but they also, you know, our members also tend to participate in neighborhood association meetings. Councilmember Andrea Boone is my district council member. So I work for her, but when I see her at, you know, my neighborhood association meeting, I take off my work hat and I put on my, you know, my constituent hat. So I think there's a really great opportunity to engage your council members because they're so visible. They're easily accessible. A lot of them check their own emails and different things like that. So, you know, don't think that you send an email to your council member and it'll get lost or some staff person to read it. You'd be surprised how many members actually read their own emails and respond to them personally. And they're really involved. I mean, you see them at various events, and they all attend their NPU and neighborhood association meetings. So I strongly encourage everybody, if you see your council member there, you know, take the time to walk up to them and engage them. You know, get to know who they are, and more importantly, get them to know who you are.
That is so true. And, you know, little known fact about me, before coming into this role, I worked in the Atlanta City Council as well. And I can tell you that I won't get into all the details about that, but not too long ago, maybe in early March or late February, I was in the office working. It was probably about 6:45 at night. And I called the council member who happens to be my council member where I live. I called that council member, although it was on a work-related matter. It's 6:45 at night. I fully expected to get voicemail. It's really the only reason I called. And he answered the phone himself. I stumbled over my words. I'm like, oh, hi, okay. But to Theo's point, they do often answer the phones themselves. Many of them, several of them, you know, do their own scheduling, or they'll answer their, you know, obviously they'll give out their cell phone numbers, etc. They are really accessible, some more so than others, but you certainly want to try it. And most importantly, to Theo's point, most importantly, it's important that they know who you are. One last thing that I wanted to add to piggyback off of what Theo said is that I commend, as a resident, I highly commend the Atlanta City Council staff for the swiftness and the excellence with which you all moved your entire operation online. I can relate to that because my team spent pretty much the entire month of March and part of April trying to figure it out. And if the truth be told, we're still working out kinks in the system and in the process. It's not an easy thing to almost overnight have to contemplate how to move your whole operation to the internet. So kudos to y'all for doing that. But the point I was going to make is that we've seen, and I believe the Atlanta City Council has seen the same, but on the NPU side, we have seen just a tremendous increase in participation from the community as a result of moving all of these operations online. So access is greater now than it ever was before. Being able to pick up the phone and leave your comment instead of taking off from work, driving to City Hall, paying for $13 for parking, coming inside, waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting until your name is called. And if it's a really controversial issue, you might be there for 4 hours waiting for your name to be called. And then to give your remark and go home. Now you can just pick up the phone and be heard. It really has changed the way Atlanta is doing community engagement. The NPUs are a little different because there are 25 of them and all 25 of them operate very differently. But even in that respect, you can, 23 out of the 25 NPUs, you can now participate from the comfort of your home. That was unheard of before March 17th. It just did not happen in the city of Atlanta, where you could participate in an NPU meeting. You could vote on an item from your bedroom. That wasn't the case before. So,
and we're really looking at how we can continue some of these procedures. Every week we go back, really after every committee meeting and council meeting that we have, we debrief and see, hey, what went well and what didn't. And some of the policies that we've instituted in this remote environment, what I'll say is really a testament to the staff. We got the charge from Council President Moore like March 3rd or March 4th, and we had 5 days to come up with how are we going to host our meetings remotely. It's never been done before. What all goes into it? And when I say that, you all just see, you know, Facebook or Twitter, you all just kind of see the faces and everything, but there are so many people behind the scenes that are really trying to work into pulling this off. And I really have to give them kudos. I did it when we had our budget briefing last week, but the staff has done, I really can't say how great of a job that they've done. And when you get emails from my counterpart in Maui, Hawaii, or what was the city in Maine? We've had cities from across the country reach out to my office and say, hey, how are you all hosting your meetings, remotely, because they're watching. Our social media metrics have increased significantly, but our IT manager, our deputy staff director, Ms. Kempson Wright, our communications director, Zena Lewis, and the rest of the team has done such a great job in standing up these meetings that, we joke, but it's really telling the truth. We're working harder from home than we did at work, because there's so much that you have to do to pull these remote meetings off. And I just want everyone to really know it's a lot that goes into standing these meetings up every week. We have meetings every week, a call with the mayor. There's a lot that goes in to ensure that when you call and leave your
Right-hand corner, click on participants.
when you
Sorry,
leave
sorry,
your-
go ahead.
when you call in to leave your comment, to make sure that it's played, we have 8 different numbers to call in to leave your public comment, 9 if you include our budget hearings, which ended, last week. And to be able to manage all that and organize it, if the meeting starts at 9 o'clock, we're on Microsoft Teams at 8 o'clock, making sure everything's in place so that at 9 o'clock when that meeting starts, or 9:30, it goes off without a hitch. And so, we're working all throughout the day. And then at night, you're actually having to go back and respond to emails and everything. So I do want to take just a moment just to really thank the staff, because they are doing a lot, so.
Yeah, and they're doing a fabulous job. I watch every single meeting, every committee meeting, every council meeting. Sometimes, like today, I had to watch CDHS because I missed it on Tuesday, but I watched the whole meeting today. And they really are relatively flawless. And it's technology on top of that. So things will go wrong, but you all have really made it look easy. And I know firsthand that there's so much that goes on behind the scenes to make it work. So kudos to you, kudos to your whole team. I know some of them are here tonight. I hope y'all, as a resident, I hope y'all accept my appreciation for the work that you're doing to make these meetings available to the voters and the taxpayers and the residents of Atlanta. Thank you for that. We've got some more questions, so let's get through them. JMAM, would you mind identifying yourself? Give us your first and last name, Mr. or Ms. MAM, and then ask your question.
Hi, Leah, Mr. Pace. Hi, it's Jules Murphy from the Task Force on Accessibility and Inclusivity. It's
Yes,
great
how
to
are you?
see you. Leah, this is my 3rd NPU meeting, and it's great to see you. Thank you for your leadership. Mr. Pace, people who were speaking on comments were recognized, and I'm so glad that they spoke to what I was going to speak to, and that is, we were discussing some of these accommodations at the task force, and in a matter of less than 2 weeks, you went from conversation, taking notes, enhancing what you already had as plans for future implementation, and now this amazing network of remote meetings. Thank you. Congratulations to you and all of your colleagues. This has been outstanding.
Yeah.
I also, sorry, thank you. I also have a question that it looks like Jennifer raised for me, and that is that when I previously attended regularly transportation and other committee meetings, I had 2 opportunities for public comment. One opportunity at the outset of the meeting, and a second opportunity for, let's say, rebuttal public comment at the end of the meeting, for a total of 4 to 5 minutes, depending upon which meeting setting that we were in. And I was wondering, as Leah, I'll be honest with you, when you talk about meeting agenda lengths, Mr. Pace knows I served in the state of Georgia for the Board of Regents. I created 500-page agendas. These 1,000+ page agendas under the veil of darkness of COVID-19 are impossible for a below poverty level person to try to print, read, comprehend, understand, comment upon, especially when they're only provided in sometimes less than 2 days. And in addition to that, most of, and you know, Mr. Pace, I don't assert until I have investigated fully, most of the presentations are not available online. So I see presentations, thank goodness, and congratulations and applause for President Felicia Moore, her transparency, TJ, her social media director, for keeping everything. It is also all broadcast on her page, and that's where I connect with meetings. So I'm looking for that second set of public comments for rebuttals. And I am also interested in Jim Martin and a couple of other people's comments that, yes, it's true, some of us do not have the benefit of council members who serve us, who answer our phones or our emails. And that is why we have to go to committee meetings and council meetings. And you are the most receptive set of employees. One set of employees that I'm interested in getting to know are your public policy advisory staff. If these are the folks, like I used to be as the parliamentarian executive secretary for the Board of Regents for the University System of Georgia, if these are the folks who are writing the legislation, and commissioners and other folks are canceling or just not appearing for meetings with constituents, I'd like to know if those public policy advisors can be or will be as accessible for meetings as you, Mr. Pace, and your colleagues have been. Leah, thank you. That was a really long, multifaceted question. Sorry. Thank you, Theo.
Well, I'll kind of take it.
Thank you for the question.
Yeah, I'll try to answer, I think, as much as I can. What I will say is that our agendas are made available online the Friday before our committee and full council meetings. We have our internal policies that we have. So normally by 2 to 3 o'clock in the afternoon, all of our agendas are made available to the public. Also, if you go to the city council page, under each standing committee, there's a tab for presentations. And one of the processes that we've changed since we've been in a remote environment is that normally what we used to do is we used to post the presentations after the meeting, but now we actually post them prior to the meeting beginning so the public can kind of read along and see what's going on. That's one of those policies that you'll see that we will kind of continue to institute even upon City Hall reopening. As it relates to public comment, each committee chair has the authority basically to determine how they would like public comment to hold. Normally you would get 2 minutes at the beginning of the meeting in some committees, 2 minutes at the end. Other committees, you would only get 2 minutes at the beginning of each meeting. As we've gone into this remote environment, we've actually increased public comment to 3 minutes. Logistically, it is, I would say, it's really difficult to be able to allow public comment at the begin and end of each meeting because we're trying to make it as simplistic as possible, as simple as possible for people to leave public comments. So we've actually, you're losing a minute, but it's actually 3 continuous minutes of public comment that you get. And really the committee chair has the authority to determine how long and at what points of the meeting or public comment they like to have for each committee. What I also say is that the task force that you provide over, I came to a couple of meetings as well as the policy analyst for the Committee on Council, Jared Evans, attended each one of your committee meetings. I believe you're all working on a presentation for Monday's meeting. So the policy analysts are always available. We work with the chair. And what I would say is that, you know, your engagement and determination to really reach out to your council members is the outcome of that was your inclusion task force that you preside over and the recommendations that you are making to city council. So although, you know, I think you may say that, you know, some of your council members may not, you know, be as responsive as others, I think your determination and really continuing to reach out and get in contact with Councilmember Dickens and his staff, really the outcome of that was a task force that he introduced legislation to create, and the recommendations that you have that are actually coming forth on Monday.
Thank you. So we've got a few more questions still, and we still have a little bit of time. The class ends at 8 o'clock, so we can take a few more questions, but I do want to remind everyone to please limit your questions to course content related questions. Please and thank you. And I know that the line on this one can be blurred a little bit because we are talking about the legislative process. So it's real easy to ask questions that are just on the line, but please be considerate of that. Katie Kissel, pardon me if I'm mispronouncing your last name, but you're up next. Go ahead and ask the question.
Hi, my name is Katie Kissel. I'm president of Kirkwood Neighbors Organization. Thank you guys for having these meetings and having them virtually. I agree with everyone else that these have definitely increased accessibility, and we've seen the same thing in our neighborhood organizations meetings, which we've held virtually April, May, and now just yesterday in June. My question really centers around when we're talking about the legislative process and the power or the role of the MPU, and by extension of that, in MPUs where neighborhood organizations exist. Obviously, most MPUs defer to the neighborhood organization and how they voted on a certain item. So that kind of makes the MPU process a little bit simpler and a little more streamlined. In MPUO, which is where I'm at, we have 3 neighborhoods and 3 different neighborhood organizations. So almost everything that comes before the MPU has already been seen by an individual neighborhood organization. I think there is a concern overall in the lack of a role and the lack of power that MPUs have played in city council, that people are kind of bypassing that step and trying to maybe go directly to the particular city council committee meeting, particular city council meeting, and so my question around that is power, as far as the legislative process is concerned, is what are we doing to kind of work within that process? And then I do just have a small kind of follow-up when it talks to neighborhood organizations and the fact that we have neighborhood organizations all over the city, and we're all like board members, we're all doing our own thing, know each other and know who we are or what we're doing. And I would really like to see organized from the MPU organization at a meeting or Zoom meeting, however it would be, of neighborhood organization board members. So if I could I wanted to put that comment out there, but my question really has to do with the power and the role that MPU plays in city government.
So I'll answer your question, but I would kind of defer to Ms. LaRue, and more historically, Mr. Martin, who probably has a lot of insight himself. But the MPUs were created specifically for zoning and land use matters. You have basically 25 MPUs with 25 different sets of bylaws. So they all operate, same with some distinction. When I was MPU chair, as you stated, I would always defer any land use or zoning matters to the neighborhood association. I live in Chalet Peyton Forest, so I really wouldn't want someone in Collier Heights determining, what happened with the zoning matter with my neighborhood. So I would always defer to the neighborhood association. Also, when I was chair, I also kept in contact with all of the neighborhood association presidents. I would always filter information through the presidents. there's a lot of internal neighborhood politics that you tend to come up with. Like you said, having 3 different neighborhood associations, but we always kept in touch, and I would always have regular contact with the various neighborhood associations. One of the things that I experienced as neighborhood chair is that you would always have some issues that technically the NPU had no purview over, that would always arise at NPU, and they would take up an hour of your meeting. So I would try to defer those issues. If it's not to the affected neighborhood association, I would defer to APD or fire. So I think part of that, and city planning has an annual training. I think it's February of each year, Leah, February, April, around that time. Well, February, March, around that time, where there's a training each year. Get to know your zone commanders, get to know people in the Office of Special Events. So if you have a special event permit coming to your neighborhood association or the NPU that you have to vote for, you can always reach out to Ebony Barley in the Office of Special Events and get a little bit more insight. I always thought it was good to always, kind of have a meeting with the applicant prior to the NPU meeting where we're voting. But as you stated, I would always defer to the neighborhood association. So if we received a zoning application, I would defer to hey, you all go to we're going to put you on the July agenda, but you go to the neighborhood association's June meeting. And the thing that we would always have issues with are, you get a bunch of people who never come to the NPU meeting. Then as soon as they have an item that's affecting their neighborhood, you get 50 people showing up. And because of our bylaws, they hadn't attended 2 regular meetings in the past year, so they can't vote. So what I would always do is at the beginning of each year, or when we adopted the bylaws in September, by December of that year, if I was reelected between, Christmas and the New Year, I would send the bylaws to the neighborhood associations. And I always made it a point to try to attend each neighborhood association at least twice a year. And just a general reminder, hey, you are getting a lot of zoning applications. Please don't all show up and this is your first meeting and I tell you you can't vote. So I'm, it's kind of partly being proactive, but it's also having, open lines of communication between the neighborhood association and the NPU. It's, I think there's a little bit of a disconnect because as a neighborhood person, I'm like, we're a neighborhood, but then we report to the NPUs and we don't want, I see it from both angles. But I think, the important part of it is communication, and not just when we have a hot topic coming up on the agenda, but throughout the year, just really communicating, because it's really for the betterment, of everyone. I think Councilmember Archibald, tries to attend a lot of your neighborhood association meetings, her staff, or the NPU meeting. So it's always, good to have a good relationship with Ms. LaRue and the planning staff in case but I really try to anticipate what's coming up, because we get the zoning agendas and I can already say that's going to be a problem. And I tend to reach out to the neighborhood association immediately and try to work with them to come to a happy resolution. But, the last thing you want as an NPU chair is walking into your meeting and there are 100 people in the room and like 20 of them and the other 80 hadn't shown up at all, and you know what they're there for. And I have to tell you all that you all can't vote because you have, you all haven't been to a meeting in ever, and you can't vote. So to me, it's really just communication. And really, I looked at it from the standpoint of the NPUs are there to really assist the neighborhood associations. We all have the recognized neighborhood associations. So the NPU to me is really there to assist, but the NPU is a body to hear zoning and land use items.
Yeah, so I'm sorry, let me just to make clear, because I feel like there was just a little bit of a misunderstanding. So my concern is not the NPU's power versus the neighborhood organization's power. My concern is the NPU's power in the
city.
The city.
I'll speak to that.
Yeah,
I'll speak to that. And that was helpful, Theo. That information was helpful. One thing that I want to point out is that just as a point of clarity, the MPU system was actually created to give residents a voice in the CDP, the Comprehensive Development Plan. And we are in the process of launching a class because, of course, we're moving into CDP season. And we'll be doing a class on that as well for those that are not familiar with the Comprehensive Development Plan. And then it was also the other part of the other reason that the MPU system was created was to give residents a voice in the city's budget as well. That we don't really deal with that part so much anymore. The zoning and land use, special events and alcohol licenses, subdivisions and other items were added into the code years after, at separate times after the ordinance was written and after the MPU system was established in 1974. That said, we do have a class that we offer. It's in our catalog on the permitting process, I think is the name of that class, Samantha, the permitting process. So that class, the instructors pulled out of teaching that class for now, just because of the times that we're in. They thought it would be more appropriate to offer that class later. So for now, we're kind of on hold and determining whether we want to go ahead and teach it with different instructors or wait. But the reason that that's relevant, the reason I'm saying that is that what we have found, what I have found in this role is that so many people are frustrated. I actually have an MPU now that does not vote on alcohol licenses at all. They have refused to vote on alcohol licenses because they believe that the city of Atlanta does not value the MPU's input on alcohol licenses anyway. Well, here's the truth of the matter. And I'm not just saying this as an employee of the city of Atlanta. I'm saying this as a resident of the city of Atlanta, someone who has read the code, section 10 to be exact. What happens in MPU meetings is that people vote on items without knowing the criteria that the relevant board considers. The LRB, for example, the License Review Board that reviews alcohol license applications, has a specific set of criteria that they look at. And if you don't know what that criteria is, and you're recommending, your MPU is voting to recommend denial, but it's not based on one of those items, then chances are the License Review Board is not taking your recommendation into consideration because it doesn't fall in line with the criteria that they're using. The same also goes for special events, although there isn't a board for that, but the mayor's office also uses the code of ordinances to determine the criteria for which they will approve or not approve special events permits. What's important to know, and I won't take up too much time on that because that is a whole other class, but what's important to note is that the MPUs do not make decisions. MPUs are not a decision-making body in the city of Atlanta. They make recommendations to the city. And the relevant boards can, and I know that this is a sticking point for many people. I look forward to hearing Mr. Martin's comments on this and anyone else who's deeply entrenched in the MPU system, but it's a sticky subject because it is the source of quite a bit of frustration for many people. But our role, my team's role, is to make sure that people are armed with understanding what the MPU's role is. And it is not to make decisions for the city of Atlanta. It is to make recommendations. It is so that the council members and the board members know what the community's position is and why. So what we do, we encourage when we do our chair's orientation and any of our classes that are relevant to this subject, we encourage people to always consider the criteria and form their recommendations around that criteria. I could not begin to tell you how many times I've been in MPU meetings. I try my best not to miss a meeting, especially now that they're all virtual. The only time I miss an MPU meeting is if there are 3 at the same time. When there's 2, I'm in both of them, one on the phone and one on the laptop. If there are 3, I can't really do much with that. But I can't tell you how many times I've been in an MPU meeting and seen the entire discussion revolve around the color of paint or the type of lighting or where the parking is, which that can be, significant. Egress, ingress can be relevant, certainly. But when you're talking about an alcohol license and the substance of your conversation is around the cleanliness of the store, for example, or the type of lighting that they have, for example, if you're stuck on the paint color or the neon sign or anything like that, chances are the LRB is not going to use your recommendation to deny, because not because they don't care about your feedback, but because that doesn't fall in line with their criteria. So I hope that more closely answers your question, Katie. We can definitely have a more in-depth conversation about that, because I know that just barely scratches the surface of what you're really getting at, but I don't want to hold up all the other questions that we have. I think there were 3 others in the queue. Mr. Martin, oh, what a coincidence. Mr. Martin, you're up next.
Thank you. Yeah, we are advisory, and kind of going back to that earlier discussion about public comment, since we've become virtual, I think public comment serves 2 purposes. One is to show the council how many people feel strongly about what side of an issue, but also it's to provide information that will be useful to the council in making their decision on that issue. And I think that latter function has been lost with this voicemail system that we have now, because when I listened to the Finance Committee meeting yesterday, what I heard was exactly the same comment from a different individual over and over and over again. And so I don't know how to fix that. I'm just pointing that out. My question, though, was with regard to quorum, which I don't think you mentioned. Can you tell us what the quorum for the committees are? And can you tell us what the significance toward that quorum is of a council member being away?
So for our standing committees, each committee has 7 members. So you need a majority of the committee to call the meeting to order. So you need 4 members, correct? Every voting item that you have, you need a minimum of 4 members to approve that item. What you may have, I think is part of your question, is you may have a member who comes to the meeting.
Yeah, they quite often step out.
And step out, exactly. So you
use the toilet or whatever.
Right. So
excuse me, I just want to, Katie raised a really good point in the chat. Would you mind explaining what a quorum is for anyone who may not know?
I'm sorry.
Me?
Either of you. It was your question, Jim, so you can.
Well, I'll let Theo explain quorum, because this is his area of expertise.
A quorum is a minimum number of members that you need to call a meeting to order, to vote on an item. Full council, you need 8. So the meeting can't start until you have 8 council members in the room, or in this instance, 8 members on the call. And you must maintain a quorum throughout the meeting to be able to vote on items. Going back to the committee meetings, you must have 4, right? So if you only have 4 members at a meeting and one gets up and leaves the room, answer a call, use the restroom or something of that nature, you lose your quorum. You no longer have the authority to conduct business of that committee.
But the meeting doesn't stop.
Well,
I haven't seen the meeting.
Meeting doesn't stop, but you can't vote on any items.
Right.
So
okay.
what you may have seen historically is that at the beginning of the meeting, of a zoning committee meeting, for instance, there are only 3 council members there. And what we may do is we may have a presentation on the agenda. We may allow that department to go ahead and give its presentation until the council member, the 4th council member, joins the meeting. Then we officially call the meeting to order. We recognize all the members present. We adopt the agenda. We adopt the minutes of the previous meeting. You can do none of that without a quorum. So you can't vote on anything without a quorum. The meeting, as you stated, it basically stops until you have a quorum. If you lose your quorum and a member leaves and doesn't return, you basically have to adjourn the meeting, and we would pick up the rest of that meeting in committee of the whole at the next full council meeting.
Okay, and then sort of as a follow-on to that, you had stated earlier that in order for a piece of legislation to pass, it needed to be supported by a majority of the council. Does it not the case that it really needs to be supported by a majority of members present?
Only Mr. Martin.
Well, I mean, that's not necessarily a majority of the council.
I wish
That's a
you
fair
had asked
question.
Mr.
That's a fair
Conway
question.
that question when he gave his parliamentary question, but as
No, he's right, though.
I'm sorry.
He's right. It's if a member is not present to vote, if you have a quorum, which for city council is what, 8?
It's 8 at a full council meeting, correct?
So you need 4 present, no, 8, you need 5 present to pass a piece of legislation.
That is correct.
That's what he's asking.
Yes, that's correct. That's correct. So you can have as little as 8 members at a meeting, but you still need a majority of those members present to adopt a piece of legislation, correct?
All right. John Hayes had another question. Mr. Hayes?
Hey, mine's probably pretty simple. The mayor can veto. Is there a recourse? Can you override the mayor's veto with a majority or something?
Well, to override the mayor's veto, you would need a 2/3 majority of the council to do so.
Okay, cool. 2/3 of the whole council?
Correct.
Thank you. And
It's 2/3 of those members that are present.
with a quorum.
Yeah.
Okay, Michelle Simpson, and then J. Ma'am, I think that was Julie, I think your name was, and then that's it for questions. Oh, I'm sorry, Nancy Wiley is the last question that we'll take. So Michelle, then Ms. Connor, and then Ms. Wiley, and then we're done with questions. Go ahead, Michelle.
Hi, thank you. Thank you guys for having this. I want to say a little caveat. My internet has been going on and out, so in and out, sorry. So if you've already addressed this, I apologize. I have 2 questions. The first one's really quick. Will we have access to the slide presentation?
I lost my picture again.
Sorry about that. Sorry about
That's
that.
okay.
Send an email to snterry@atlantanga.gov. I'll type that in the chat.
Give it to me one. Oh, okay, perfect.
I'll type it
Your
in the
turn.
chat.
Thank you. My other question is, there's an intersection off the highway in my neighborhood that's extremely dangerous. And I was actually in a hit and run last year. And through looking at Nextdoor, there were a number of other residents who've had issues or saw very dangerous accidents. I know I reached out to my councilwoman, to the city and the state. I think the state's involved because it's off the interstate. And other people have as well. And I feel like the answers we've been giving have kind of been the runaround. I won't go into detail of all the different answers I was given, but I was going to try to put together like a petition or some type of initiative in my neighborhood to try to get a number of us calling and emailing at the same time. And I wanted to know your advice on, is there an optimal time for that particular issue? Should we go straight to the committee that handles transportation, or is there any advice you have of how we could be more effective in our advocacy for some type of light? There's no light there, getting on or off the highway.
Yeah, so the first thing, I don't know if this is a city street or a state route, but what I would really advise to do is to reach out to all the members of the transportation committee. Sometimes, there's strength in numbers, but I would, be pretty consistent. What I would also do is reach out to Josh Rowan, who's the new commissioner of the Atlanta Department of Transportation. He is he would meet you at the intersection if you requested it, or send someone from his staff to come out and meet you at that intersection. I don't know the specific details if this is a state route or not, but I believe by reaching out to your district council member, your at-large member, as well as the members of the transportation committee, and be consistent about it. Again, as I stated, the city council committees meet the second and fourth weeks of each committee. The transportation committee currently meets every second and fourth Wednesday at 9:30 a.m. and they take public comment up until an hour before the meeting. As Ms. Kissel said, I also reach out to your neighborhood organization and NPU. That is correct. But I believe, one individual sending one email and 50 people sending an email, maybe not the same exact email, to Mr. Martin's point as it relates to public comment. But, I think what we've been receiving virtually is a lot of people reading the same script, but we still have to play all of those calls. But, I think emails help, calling in and leaving voicemails for public comment. There are strength in numbers. So I think the more people you have getting involved, just engaging the council members. And Julia Puladendi, who's our analyst for for transportation, just put a link in the chat that you can pull up. You will get the attention of your council members if there are enough of you all calling in about the same issue, and they will have Mr. Rowan or someone from his staff. But yesterday in transportation, he basically said he's ridden around various districts on his bike because he was asked to really go out and see the lay of the land of what's going on. And Josh lives in the city, so as Leah said earlier, there are a lot of people who work for the city. Julia lives in the city, who staffs transportation. So we have a lot of the same issues getting back and forth to work that everyone else does. So I would really kind of organize, and reach out to your council members.
Yeah, the first, I think sorry, Theo.
No, you can go.
The first and most important step that you need to take, Michelle, is to reach out to your neighborhood association president and your MPU's, either your MPU chair or your MPU's transportation committee chairperson, and organize from within first. Get some folks that agree with you, and then certainly reach out to Commissioner Rowan. I will second Theo's assertion that Commissioner Rowan is known for coming out to meet people in the community, or sending someone from his staff to do so. Moving right along, we've got Jules or Julie. I'm sorry, I jotted down your name so I wouldn't forget. Jules.
It's okay.
Jules
That's
Murphy.
okay.
Go ahead. And listen, Miss Murphy, your last question was about 3 minutes long. I'm gonna need you to give us the 30-second question, okay?
Yeah, this is a quick one.
All right.
We're going to continue with this wonderful open meeting format when we do come out of the COVID barriers for in-person meetings. Will we, since our committee meeting rooms are relatively small, will we be able to attend this way in addition to some people showing up in person as a process, legislative process for the city? Is that in your planning conversations? That's it.
We are continuing to have this discussion. Our meetings historically have always been streamed on Facebook and Twitter. They're also shown on Channel 26. I think one of the things that we will be looking at is continuing allowing people to actually call in and leave their public comments without having to come down to City Hall. We haven't really tied down the format, whether it would be email or voicemail. I think we started initially the first cycle accepting emails, and we got some feedback that people really wanted, I want to be heard. I just want you to read off my email. And so we moved to the posture of allowing people to actually leave a 3-minute email. And I think that's something that moving forward, as we have further discussions with the Committee on Council Chair, JP Mazikite, that you may see moving forward.
Thank you, Theo. And the last question we have is coming from Nancy Wiley. Go ahead with your question, Nancy.
Yeah, this is really geek and down into the weeds. And could somebody please shut off their microphone? I'm getting a background advertisement. Jim Martin seems to be really into procedures. Normally, for a motion to pass, there must be a quorum present, which you've said is 8 people. But it's a majority of those present and voting. So if of those 8 people, only 3 choose to vote, it would only take 2 people for a motion to pass, not 5. Theo is muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. In our code of ordinances, as it relates, I don't know the exact code section off the top of my head, but members have to vote on every item. It's not like Congress or anything like that where you can vote present, but members have to vote on every item. If they are in the room, they have to vote on an item. They can't just withhold their vote.
Wow. Thank you.
No problem.
Okay, well, everybody, I have to say, I think this is probably our 8th or 9th class or so. It has by far been my favorite class, one of the most informative classes. I want to take it again. I can't wait until we can all gather in person again safely so that we can beg Theo and his team to teach this class at an in-person session, which is what we had planned initially in the first place. But this was just an amazing class, very informative. Sorry, I should be letting y'all give the feedback, but I am stoked myself. Just a great class, very informative. And thank you so much, Theo. I cannot imagine anyone else better equipped to teach us about the legislative process than you, my across the way neighbor. Thank you very much. And again, thank you and your team for all the work that you've done to expand community engagement and civic participation, which is the goal of the NPU team. Our mission for 2020 and beyond was to increase civic participation in the city of Atlanta and to improve the community engagement process. Your team is definitely setting the example on how we can all do that better as a city. So thank you very much for being here with us tonight. Thank Corinne and Jared and Santana and Julia. Was there anybody else?
I believe Wasona Griffin was on the call. Jack,
Wasona. I didn't see Wasona, but thank you, Wasona.
David Johnson. Yeah, and I'll just leave my contact information. If anyone would like to send me an email, my email address is tpace@atlantanga.gov. And my phone number is 404-330-6314. I'm pretty accessible. You may see me at Kroger or anything like that on the Beltline or anything, but please reach out to me if you have any questions, if you need me to, assist or my staff assisting with you, facilitating a conversation with your council member or anything like that. But they are really, truly accessible if you just reach out to them. So
Jennifer doesn't agree.
For having me again, I really appreciate it. This is pretty fun.
Well, thank you. Thank you. We'll definitely do it again. And if you all who are in the class will give us about 30 to 60 seconds, Samantha has an announcement that she's going to make, and then we'll let you all go.
Hey, everyone. So we have our upcoming remaining courses for NPU University. Our next course is going to be Thursday, June 30th, and it's the follow-up to our Zoning Fundamentals 1. It's our Zoning Fundamentals 2. Then we have our web-based 1008 ATO Permit Navigator and Acela Citizen Access. That's going to be on Thursday, July 2nd. We have WB 1012 Bylaws Clinic, July 9th. And then we have our WB 1008 Atlanta Community Engagement Playbook, which is actually a Saturday course. If you're interested in enrolling in any of these courses, please visit our website at www.npuatlanta.org. maybe about 20 minutes ago, a lot of you all received a survey. Please, please, please take the time to fill out that survey. We want to make sure that NPU University grows and gets better for the residents of Atlanta. So please take the time to fill out that survey. Also, if you would like to follow us on social media, you can follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at the handle NPU Atlanta, and then on Nextdoor, City of Atlanta Neighborhood Planning Units.
And if I may, you know, since all of you are now armed and equipped for lobbying your council members and talking to them about the things that are important to you, if you think that NPU University is important, would you mind telling your council member that for me, please? As you know, we're moving into budget season, and it takes budget to produce these programs. We pay for Zoom every month. We pay staff to be here, etc. We pay for marketing materials and giveaway items and everything else. So please, please, please make sure your council members know that you benefit from this program. And certainly we invite you to visit our website at npuatlanta.org so that you can register for future classes. Please do. I just want to reiterate what Samantha has invited you to complete that survey. Please complete the survey because this is a new program. We just launched it in January, and we want NPU University to be everything that you need it to be. The only way we can improve the programming, the classes that we offer, the instructors, any of that, the course material, is if you tell us what needs to be improved. If there are classes that you think that your neighbors or yourself would benefit from, please let us know. And if we can produce those classes, we'll do so. And that's all I have. It's 8 o'clock and we like to get you out on time. So if there are no other questions or comments or anything, please consider yourselves dismissed. And thank you again to Theo Pace and your entire staff. Thank you.
Much appreciated. Y'all
And
have
of course, thanks to my staff for your amazing work. Good job, Samantha. Good job, Tony.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Terrence.